The royal court of the Xerilon Empire was silent, not because of fear, but because something very unusual had happened. A human male had just entered the chamber, standing tall with no bow. No kneel, no fear in his eyes. Elias's boots echoed. As he walked across the polished floor, his clothes were simple but clean, his expression calm. He stopped only when he reached the bottom of the Queen's throne steps. Queen Sakara watched him with sharp golden eyes. She was tall, powerful, her skin a deep silver blue, her long hair like flowing obsidian. She wore the reproductive crown, a symbol that today she would choose a mate, not for love, but for genetic strength, political unity, and producing the next royal heir, usually candidates from across the galaxy begged for the honor, but this human stood like he didn't care. The court watched silently as a royal servant stepped forward and presented Elias with a scroll. It was the royal reproductive contract, the document every chosen male had to sign. It gave full control to the Queen, promised obedience, and allowed her to claim the partner anytime, anywhere. Most males were honored to be owned by her. Elias simply took the scroll, opened it slowly, and began reading aloud. Clause 1. The Queen may claim her partner at any moment. He raised an eyebrow and looked up at her. Clause 2. The partner shall surrender all rights over his offspring. He let the words hang in the air. Then he did something no one had ever done. He looked the Queen straight in the eyes and tore the scroll in half. Gasps exploded in the chamber. Guards stepped forward, weapons drawn. High nobles whispered in horror. The Queen herself leaned forward slightly, her face unreadable. Elias didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply dropped the shredded paper on the floor and said, "If you think I'm here to be your toy, you've made a big mistake." Queen Sakara raised her hand, stopping the guards. The room froze again. "You dare insult the crown of Xerella?" she asked, her voice cold and smooth. "No," Elias replied. "I'm insulting the idea that any intelligent person would agree to that contract." A silence followed that felt like a thunderstorm about to explode. The Queen slowly stood. Descending the stairs with graceful strength, she stopped only inches away from him. Looking down into his defiant eyes, "You're either very stupid," she said, "or very brave." Elias gave a half smile. "Try me." The Queen studied him for a long moment. Then she did something no one expected. She laughed. Not a fake laugh, not a cruel one, a real one, short, surprised, and honest. The court looked confused, unsure whether to be afraid or amused. "I was told humans were soft," she said, walking around him slowly. "All words, no spine. Maybe you've been talking to the wrong humans." Elias replied. She paused behind him, voice soft. "You know what this means, don't you?" "I know it means I'm still standing, and you didn't kill me yet." She returned to face him, her smile fading. "This was a test," she whispered, "to see what kind of man you really are. And now?" Elias asked. "Now?" she said, turning back to her throne. "I'm curious." She sat down again, this time with her chin resting on one hand. "Guards, no need to lock him up," she announced to the chamber. "But keep him close." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because," she said with a dangerous smile, "I don't know yet if I want to kill you or keep you." As he turned to leave, escorted by 2 silent guards, Elias couldn't help but glance back. The Queen was still watching him, like a hunter who just found prey that bites back. And for the first time in her long rule, Queen Sakara felt something unfamiliar, excitement. This human was different, and she had no idea what he would do next. But one thing was certain: the game had just begun. The Queen didn't summon him the next day, nor the next after that. Instead, Elias stayed in a royal guest chamber that didn't feel like a prison, but also didn't feel free. He was watched every hour, every meal tasted first, and his door clicked every time he moved near it. But he didn't complain, he waited, silently, patiently. On the fourth night, the door opened without a knock. 2 guards entered and stood aside, and then she walked in, Queen Sakara, dressed not in her battle crown or flowing silk but in something softer, quieter. Her long silver-blue robe flowed behind her like mist, and her eyes were sharper than ever. Elias stood, not out of respect, but because she filled the room like a storm. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she walked past him, slowly touching the strange sculptures near the window. They say humans have no honor. She said finally that you lie, flirt, and run when things get real. Elias crossed his arms, and what do you say? She turned, one brow raised. I say you're interesting. Still not a compliment, he said, and that made her lips twitch. Just slightly. I expected you to beg, she admitted. I expected you to talk big, and then kneel, when I got close. I don't kneel, he replied, not for contracts, not for titles, not even for royalty. He paused, then added, especially not for someone who doesn't know what they really want. That hit something. Her expression shifted just for a second. Then she stepped closer, slowly, like a predator testing its prey. You think I don't know what I want? She asked, voice soft, almost dangerous. I think, Elias said carefully. You've always had people give you what you should want. There was silence, deep and heavy. Then she laughed. Not loud this time, but dark and thoughtful. Do you want me human? Elias didn't blink. I want someone real. Her head tilted, curious now. And if I want you, without the contract? Elias looked her dead in the eyes. Then prove it. That stopped her. She had expected fear. Maybe pride, or even desire. But this human. He challenged her in a way no prince, no general, no suitor ever had. She didn't know whether to be furious or fascinated. Finally, she turned to leave, but paused at the door. When I choose someone, she said without turning around, they don't get a choice, Elias answered calmly. Then maybe you've never chosen the right one. The door closed behind her. But the echo of his words stayed longer than she wanted. In the hall, her guards glanced at her face. Trying to read her silence, they failed. She walked through her palace without speaking, but inside her chest, something strange stirred. It wasn't anger. It wasn't desire. It was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity mixed with doubt, and a small, dangerous spark of admiration. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the stars outside her window and wondered for the first time. What if this human wasn't just different? What if he was right? The music of the royal gala echoed through the golden halls. But Elias stood alone on the balcony, far from the lights, far from the guests. He didn't wear armor or robes like the others, just a black formal suit provided by the palace tailored, but still feeling like a costume. Behind him, laughter and alien tongues filled the air, but he ignored them, eyes fixed on the strange constellations above. He heard the footsteps long before she spoke. I thought you hated parties, Queen Sakara said from behind. He didn't turn, just shrugged. I hate fake ones. She stepped beside him. Arms folded, not in royal pose, but something more relaxed, more human. They wanted me to choose a mate tonight, she said softly. 3 princes came with ships full of gifts, each offering their bloodline and loyalty. Elias finally looked at her and, I sent them away, she said. Told them I was still undecided. He raised an eyebrow. And what are you actually deciding? She turned to face him fully now. If you're worth the storm, I'll have to unleash. Elias chuckled. Once. Now that sounds like you. She stepped closer. Too close for a queen. Close enough for the guards watching from above, too tense. But she didn't care, and neither did he. You confuse me, she whispered. You insult me, challenge me, and yet I think of you more than I should. Elias leaned in slightly. Because I'm not scared of you. She narrowed her golden eyes. Maybe I want someone who is. No, he said, voice calm and steady. You want someone who sees you. That broke something, not in pain, but in silence. She looked away, jaw tight. When I was crowned, she said, they trained me to control everything, my voice, my body, my heart. And yet, Elias replied, you're here, talking. Like a person, not a queen. She smiled, bitter and soft. I don't know how to stop, she admitted. I've never tried before. He studied her, then asked, do you want to try now? Her lips parted like she might say yes or scream no, but instead, a voice called out behind them, Your Majesty. One of her advisors interrupted, breathless. The delegation from Thressen has arrived. They bring word from the outer houses, and they are demanding your decision. The queen's eyes flicked between Elias and her duty. For a long second, she said nothing. Then she stepped back from him, straightened her posture, and her voice returned to royal strength. Tell them, I'll be there shortly, she said. To the advisor, who bowed and left quickly, but before walking away, she turned to Elias again. Her tone quiet. They want a leader who follows rules. He met her gaze, and what do you want? She didn't answer, just looked at him. Truly looked like someone seeing a different path for the first time. Then she left, and Elias stayed behind, once again alone on the balcony. Inside the palace, the stars kept moving, and so did something. Deep within the queen, a shift, slow but certain, like stone cracking under warm sunlight for the very first time. The explosion came during the third night. Shaking the palace walls like thunder from beneath the earth, Elias was asleep, dreaming of home until the floor cracked beneath him and alarms screamed through the ceiling. He jumped from the bed. Just as the door burst open, not with guards, but with smoke and red warning lights. Outside the hall, soldiers were running, weapons drawn. No one explained what was happening, but instinct told him one thing: she was in danger. He sprinted barefoot down the corridor, ducking debris, fire lighting up the windows, at the heart of the palace, deep inside the command hall. Queen Sakara stood surrounded by flames and loyal warriors. Her throne room was under attack from inside. It wasn't an outside invasion, it was betrayal. A faction within her own council had risen. Furious at her softness, her hesitation to choose a mate, they blamed the human. They wanted her replaced. Elias reached the main door and found it blocked. 2 guards pointed their blades at him, shouting that the queen had given no orders for outsiders. He didn't stop to argue. He grabbed one of the tall metal shields leaning near the wall and charged. The door slammed open under his weight, and the sight froze everyone. The human had come through fire, covered in ash, bleeding from the arm, but his eyes searched only for one face. Sakara turned in shock. Elias, he ran to her without hesitation, pulling her down just before. Another blast hit the wall behind her. She landed hard, half under him, half in shock. You came for me, she whispered, breathless. I said I wasn't yours, Elias said through smoke. But that doesn't mean I'd let them take you. They crawled through the broken side hall. Dodging fire and rebels, he led her through the tunnels he had memorized during his board nights alone. She never asked why he remembered he was human. After all, humans survive by watching, learning, preparing, even when no one thinks they should. At one point, she stumbled. Blood on her leg, he lifted her without asking, her arms around his neck. You're bleeding, she murmured. So are you, he said back, still moving in. That moment, she didn't feel like a queen, and he didn't feel like a subject. They were just 2 beings trying to survive a night that had turned against them. By dawn, the rebellion had failed. Her loyal forces regained control, and the traitors were dragged away, but the palace was half ruined. and the people were shaken. Elias sat quietly on the edge of the queen's bed as a medic wrapped his arm. Sakara sat beside him, hair tangled, face smudged with smoke. She hadn't spoken for a long time. Finally, she said, "You should have run." He looked at her, tired but steady. "I did straight toward you." She blinked slowly, then let out a soft breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I used to believe that strength meant never needing anyone," she said, "but last night I would have died without you." Elias met her eyes, and there was something different there. Not pride, not power. It was something close to trust. "I didn't save you because you're a queen," he said. "I saved you because I see you." For once, she didn't answer with words. She just reached out, her hand resting gently on his. Not as a ruler, not as a test, but as a woman who, for the first time, didn't feel completely alone. And in that silence, they both understood the contract she once wanted him to sign meant nothing now, because the bond between them was already real, and real things don't need paper to prove they exist. The rebuilding began the next morning. Cracks in the walls were fixed, smoke cleaned, banners raised again to hide the damage, but not everything broken could be repaired so easily. The council chamber, once filled with loyal advisors, now echoed with tension. Queen Sakara stood at the center, dressed in her ceremonial armor, not for battle, but for control. She looked calm, but her fingers curled against the edges of her chair. Across from her stood the new delegation from the Royal High Council, flown in after the rebellion. They didn't bow, they didn't smile. They brought a new reproductive contract already stamped, already approved. A pure-blood noble was selected. A tall Xerolan male with sharp teeth and colder eyes. He didn't even look at the queen. He looked at her throne. "This will restore order," one elder said, pushing the contract forward. Sakara didn't touch it. "I told you. I'm not ready to choose," she said firmly. "You already have," the elder replied. "You just won't admit it." The words stung more than she showed. She thought of Elias still recovering, still silent. She hadn't seen him since the battle. He had refused the royal medbay, choosing instead to rest in the old guest chamber, alone, as if he was waiting for something. Later that evening, she found him in the training garden. He was sweating, swinging a curved blade given by one of her old guards. He didn't stop when she arrived, didn't ask why she was there. She waited. And when he finally did stop, she handed him a folded scroll. He opened it slowly, recognizing the royal seal, a new contract. He asked. She nodded, eyes unreadable. "They want me to sign it." He studied her, then looked back at the scroll. "You didn't write this?" he said quietly. "No," she replied. "But they say I must." He held the paper between his fingers for a moment, then looked at her. "You want me to read it?" She shook her head. "I want you to burn it." He didn't move. "You sure?" "No," she whispered, "but I trust you." He smiled slightly, then lit a match. They watched it burn together, the paper curling, the words turning to ash. When it was gone, neither of them spoke for a while. "You'll lose support," Elias said finally. "I already did," she replied. "The day I started wanting something for myself." He stepped closer, careful, respectful. "What do you want, Sakara?" She looked up at him. "No crown, no guards, no rules. You," she said. "Not as a contract, not as a symbol." Elias placed a hand over hers. "Then we don't need paper," he said. "We just need to stand together." And for the first time in her rule, she chose not power, not tradition. She chose someone who could walk beside her, not behind her. But not everyone in the empire would accept that. Not yet. And deep in the shadows of the outer houses, someone was already sharpening the blade of revenge. The sky above the capital turned red just before midnight. Not from sunset, but from fire. 3 explosions tore through the southern defense towers. followed by silence, then sirens, then screams. Queen Sakara was already on her feet before. The palace lights flickered. She didn't need a report. She felt it in her bones. This was war. Coordinated strike from the noble families who wanted her replaced. The fire was their message. We're done waiting. In the West Wing, Elias woke to the sound of shattering glass. Two masked attackers burst into his room, moving fast and without a word. He ducked the first blade, grabbed the edge of a table, and drove it into the second one's gut. Pain roared across his ribs as a sharp claw slashed him, but he didn't stop. He moved like someone who had survived worse, back on Earth. Bleeding but alive, he escaped into the corridor. Limping but focused, he didn't head for safety. He went looking for her. Meanwhile, in the royal hall, Sakara stood on the main stair with her sword drawn. Behind her, her most loyal guards defended the throne. In front of her, enemies poured in Zarellan elites with polished armor and the cold look of blood in their eyes. And among them stood Lord Veresk, the noble who had once offered her a contract. Of alliance, he now held that same contract, torn and burned. This is what happens when you let a human into the court. He sneered. Sakara didn't answer. She just attacked. Steel rang out. Sparks flying as she fought off three at once. But even she couldn't fight forever. One blade caught her shoulder, and she fell to one knee, vision blurring, just. As a shout echoed across the hall, Elias charged in, still bleeding, face bruised. Eyes full of fury, he crashed into the attackers like a living storm. One of them tried to strike him from behind, but Sakara, even injured, turned and blocked it. They fought together, not in command, not in rank, but side by side. By the time it was over, bodies littered the floor, smoke curled from broken walls, and silence returned like a heavy fog. Elias dropped to his knees, breathing hard. Sakara knelt beside him, her arm around his back. "You're bleeding again," she said softly. "So are you," he replied, voice weak, but smiling. She looked at him. Really looked, not as a ruler, not as a soldier, but as someone whose heart was no longer a secret. The throne stood behind them, untouched but unimportant. The people who had wanted to take it now lay unconscious or worse. "We can't keep fighting like this," she said. "Then let's change the rules," Elias whispered. She nodded slowly. "It's time. Outside." The smoke rose high into the sky. Inside, two hearts stood stronger than an empire's laws. But they both knew this wasn't the end, because change never comes without a final cost. The council chamber was silent, but not with fear this time. It was respect. Queen Sakara entered alone. No crown, no robe, no guards. She wore dark armor still stained from the last battle, and her golden eyes burned with a fire that no law could silence. Behind her, Elias walked, not one step behind, but beside her. His wounds were healing. His hands still bandaged, but he stood tall, unshaken. The nobles stared, waiting for her to speak, to beg, to explain. But she didn't. She reached the center of the room and dropped the last remaining contract on the floor. Then, without a word, she stepped on it, crushing it under her boot. Gasps rose. A few nobles stood in outrage. "You're breaking tradition." One of them barked. "No," she said calmly. "I'm building a new one." Elias watched her with quiet pride. Knowing she had just made a choice no one else dared. Not for love alone, but for freedom. "I will no longer bind lives with paper and power," she declared. "From this day, there will be no forced bonds, no bloodline contracts." Silence fell again, deeper than before. Then, who will rule beside you? Another noble challenged. She turned to Elias, and for the first time in public, offered her hand not with command, but invitation. He took it without hesitation. "I will not choose a man who belongs to me," she said. "I will stand with someone who chooses me freely, every day. And when Elias looked at her, he said the words no one expected. Then I choose you, Sakara, without papers, without rules. The chamber erupted, some in anger, some in awe, but it no longer mattered. The old empire had ended with a signature never written. A new one had just begun with a promise made from heart to heart. Months passed, and the galaxy watched. Some laughed, some doubted, but many followed. More species dropped their traditions of forced pairings and royal contracts. And in the center of it all stood a human who once tore a scroll, and a queen who dared to let herself be loved, not owned, one night under a silver sky. They walked together in the palace garden. There were no guards, no servants, just wind and stars. Sakara paused, looking up. You know, she said. Softly, I could still write you a new contract. Elias laughed. Don't you dare. She smiled and leaned against him, her voice barely a whisper. You really are trouble, human. He kissed the top of her head. But I'm your kind of trouble now, and the stars above them just kept shining.